Oh, you know what, Deb? I didn't bring my script, so
You'll do just fine.
you,
We are
okay.
recording though.
I may be winging it a little bit. So I guess this is call to order, and Deb, if you would take the roll call, that'd be great.
I can do that. Marie Bender.
Here.
Carolyn Versith.
Here.
Thomas Hildebrand.
Here.
Craig Olson.
Here.
Geraldine Four. Here. Lisa Anderl.
Here.
And Hillary Ete.
Here.
Did I get it right?
You got it.
Okay, so Deb, do we have any public appearances?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okey doke. So the first order of business is the minutes from January. Does anybody have any comments? I had just one thought, and that's in the last page under general updates. It's a little ambiguous. The last sentence of the first paragraph, it was a tremendous effort and wanted to recognize his hard work. I think it should start with the trustees noted that it was a tremendous effort. Or observed, whatever verb you want to use.
Okay, Marie, I'll go ahead and make those adjustments to the minutes.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve?
Approved.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Then we move on to
Marie? Oh,
I'm
I'm sorry. The motion went so fast that I didn't catch who moved and who seconded. So would you mind repeating that for me, please?
Who moved?
Okay.
Sorry, you're on mute.
Carol seconded.
And
Okay.
Carol. Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
All right, we'll try to slow down a bit.
Okay.
Okay, so the post plan update. Is that Hillary or is that Kim or Ellen? Or somebody else? Jason.
It's Jason this evening.
Hey.
I'm playing double duty tonight, so I'm joining the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board first for this item, and then I'm going to jump over to the Parks Commission meeting. So, good evening, Jason Kittner, Chief of Operations and your Public Works Director. This will be a very short item, but we are restarting the Parks and Recreation PROS plan. We began this endeavor in 2020 before the pandemic hit, and then the pandemic hit and it paused everything, but we are rebooting it now. And this is our 6-year strategic plan for the Parks and Recreation Department that guides programming, capital projects, and reinvestment needs in our parks, facilities, and recreation programming. We need to do this plan every 6 years to remain eligible for state grant opportunities. I want to say we've received over $600,000 in grant monies over the course of many years. Projects that have gone to all sorts of different things, from property acquisition to athletic field improvements to other capital improvement projects. So this is an important step, not only to remain eligible for grant funding, but also to help shape our future programming and capital projects in our Parks and Recreation services. So how can you help? In a couple different ways. Next Tuesday night, which I believe is March 23rd, there is our first open house that's going to be all virtual. You need to sign up ahead of time to register, because we are actually going to do some breakout rooms as part of that PROS plan process. But this is the first opportunity in the restart process for the public to engage in the PROS plan. This will be the first of many opportunities, and we will likely be back in a joint Parks Commission and Open Space Trust Board meeting later this year, probably in the fall is realistic, to talk about the proposed plan before it goes to be adopted by the council. So I will pause there, and I'm here to help answer any questions that you may have. But more than anything, this is an opportunity to get everyone involved. If a couple of you can participate on Tuesday night, that would be wonderful. If not, then we will be sure to engage you down the road as well. And I'm here to help.
Oh, sorry.
Nope, you're good.
Anyone have comments? Jerry?
Jason, could I just clarify, you said you'll be back to us sometime in the fall. Would that be when the draft plan is complete? I was looking at your schedule. I see you have goals and.
Yeah, so I will say our schedule is changing a little bit. We had high ambitions of getting this done fairly quickly, but I can tell you that the city as a whole, and particularly the Parks Commission and others, are a little bit meeting heavy right now. So we're slowing that process down a little bit. So it'll likely be back in the fall with the draft plan for the Open Space Trust Board to talk about with the Parks Commission. So yes.
Thanks.
So Jason, for the Tuesday meeting in the breakout groups, is there a breakout group that's sort of centered on open spaces?
Not necessarily open spaces. There is a section on some trails and passive recreation uses, but not necessarily open space focused. And the breakout groups are, if people register, you're gonna get, everyone who registers will get broken out differently, right? So it's a random draw in terms of which group you go to talk about it and facilitate dialogue and discussion with the community. So it's more topic based rather than, group by group.
So for the one that is sort of most relevant to open spaces, is there a way for designating at least one of us to be sure to be on that committee?
Oh, good question. So the breakout groups will all be talking about the same topics. So if you sign up,
Okay.
participate, no matter which group you get get grouped into, you will be part of the conversation.
How many of us are gonna think they're gonna be able to make that meeting?
Ma'am.
Hillary, Carol. Depends on what time my plane lands that I will be there.
Yeah. Did we say what time it is? I'm sorry.
What time is it, Jason?
I believe it's at 5:30. Let me double
5:30.
check. 5:30.
Okay, so, sorry. Well, let's just do this rather than take your time. If we could identify the trust board members and make sure that like two of us don't end up on the same committee, I'd like to have as many ears open as possible is what I'm trying to say. And then also, I would advocate for before the fall meeting. I mean, I know you're thinking of a joint meeting, but it seems to me that if we could get maybe a subset of the Parks and Rec and the Trust Board together to talk about open space. I know one of the things the Trust Board has always had on its wish list is acquisition of more open space that would be preserved, and maybe an acquisition that amplifies Angstrom open space. So I'd like to sort of have a conversation about that before we get a draft done. Am I speaking for other people, or am I a lone wolf?
Yeah, I think that's a sentiment that we expressed.
So maybe just put that in the thought process. Anything else?
Duly noted. I think we can accommodate that. I think that aligns nicely with some of the conversations that staff has had internally as well. So I think there's a good opportunity for that discussion to take place.
Okay. I think we're waiting for the next step. And maybe if you actually are going to come to the meeting, maybe just shoot Jason an email and he can do his magic to sort of assign people. Does that make sense, Jason?
Yep, you can send me an email. We'll make sure you get registered. It is from 5:30 to 7:30. Again, it's on the Zoom platform.
Okay. Okay, then I think we're ready to move on. Thank you, Jason. It's good to hear that we're trying to get back on track. Code of ethics. I think that is for Deb.
That is going to be me, and Elaine is going to drive the PowerPoint for me. I do lots of Zooming, but I don't do very many presentations on one of my 3 screens, so. Okay, so as it, the PowerPoint slide says, this really is just intended to be a very high level abbreviated training for tonight, and I'll go into more detail as we move forward. Next slide. So just a little bit of background in case you're not all familiar with this. The Code of Ethics was originally adopted in 2018, and then Council amended it in 2019. The intention then was to help officials comply with laws and policies affecting open government, explain, how, having impartial and fair judgment about your actions, and your public office being for the use of public good, things that I think all of you understand. The Code of Ethics was then amended in December 2019, and that was done to improve the process around the complaints. We had a complaint earlier that year, and Council discovered that the process responding to a complaint was not terribly clear. So the amendment made in 2019 was intended to clean that up. I do want to point out before we move to the next slide that much of this is, the entire Code of Ethics is codified in our municipal code, and in chapter 2.60, this entire presentation will be later uploaded to your online agenda. So if anyone wants to go back to it and review some of this information, it'll be there for you. Next slide. So the direction this last January, just literally 2 months ago, occurred after we had 2 Code of Ethics complaints that came forward in 2020. And so Council's direction was they wanted staff to update the Code of Ethics. They wanted us to meet with all of the boards and commissions and do exactly what I'm doing right now, which is to have this just very high level conversation and make sure that you are all aware of resources available to you. And the next piece, or the remaining piece, was we are looking to put together a training after the Code of Ethics is rewritten. And we hope to bring that back to you in April. That might be a pretty aggressive timeline, given that we're already midway through March. So I think that we'll have something, or be bringing something back no later than May. And of course, you all don't meet again until May. So that works out just well. Fine for you. Next slide. So one of the main reasons for this brief introduction is to make sure that you are aware that our city attorney is available to you for informal opinions. So if you have any questions about something, or if you worry that, maybe this is in violation of the Code of Ethics, or you just want to ask him a hypothetical question, he is available to you. His email is here in the presentation. Beal Park is our city attorney. I do need to let you know, however, is that his advice or your communication with him is an informal opinion from the city attorney, and therefore it may not be protected under attorney-client privilege. What I will tell you, what I've been telling the other boards that I have met with, and this just comes from years of being a city clerk and a public records officer, I strongly encourage you just pick up the phone and make a phone call. Rather than communicating something via email. And that way there isn't documentation of your communication. So, and some people are more concerned about that than others. So our next slide, Elaine. So the next steps in this process, as I addressed earlier, is that staff is working to make changes to our Code of Ethics. We have brought in outside legal counsel to review our code of ethics and help us in updating that information. So, but what we want from our boards and commissions is if you are the ones who are volunteering, if you have suggestions, if you have thoughts, or maybe you're familiar with a code of ethics within your own organization or another organization, please feel free to reach out to Allie Speets. She's our Chief of Administration. She is working with our consultant to make the improvements to our code of ethics, and we're open to all suggestions. And then just a reminder that after the code of ethics have been rewritten, it'll be taken back to council for adoption, and board and commission training will begin thereafter. Our original hope was that we could pull it off by April. I still think that this point is probably a bit aggressive of a timeline. So we're looking probably more at May. And that's all I really have. I will open it up for any questions from anyone.
Questions, comments?
That's about right. Usually my questions come from Planning Commission and Design Commission.
You know, one thing, Deb, I will sort of bring to people's attention is, and this comes from the commission and board chairpersons meeting, which is ethics is maybe too tight a framework, and we really should be thinking in the context of professional conduct, which I think, you know, is a broader, less legal way of looking at the concept, and probably more relevant to everyday life. So,
and volunteers.
I would just make that comment to people so that they don't think that it's only about black letter law of what's right and wrong, as so much of how do we want our you know, boards and commission members behaving.
We have I don't want to call it code of ethics at the city, but there's, you know, a certain decorum that we follow, you know, regarding gifts and things of that nature. And, you know, a lot of it is common sense. Somebody might really appreciate what I've done, and they might bring me a big basket of goodies. Deb Estrada, city clerk, doesn't hold on to that. You know, I take it out to the front counter and make it available to the public and to the rest of staff. And as all staff know, you know, myself or somebody or another staff member may be the frontline person, but it's really the organization as a whole that makes this stuff happen. So, you know, it's things like that that, you know, are a bit obvious, but it's always good to have the conversation. So you're on mute, Marie.
Sorry, I got distracted by something. I think, does anybody have any other questions?
I just have one question. Will we see a preliminary version, since it appears we're being invited to provide comments, or is the invitation to provide comments, you know, just observations from what we've seen so far?
Yeah, I would say for right now, I'm going to pinch hit a little bit here, or fall back and punt, so to speak, is look at the existing code in 2.6.
Okay.
And provide us with your feedback.
Okay.
Ultimately, it's a decision made at the legislative level with the council, and they may very well choose, as a part of this process, going to our boards and commissions and seeking your input. The challenge there is that then we push out our timeline that much farther to get everybody's thoughts on it and then incorporate it. So it may not be possible, but I can certainly share that with them, or share it with Allie as one consideration.
So if we did have comments, we would just address those to you, and you make sure.
You can send them to me if that's easier. You're all familiar with my email address, and I will forward them to Allie for you.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, sometimes that's just easier.
Okay, I think we're done. Thanks, Deb.
You're very welcome.
Forest Health Survey, 10-year update. Kim, I hear you've been burning the midnight oil to finish this, so thank you.
Yeah, oh, you're welcome. Well, I think there are many staff that have been burning a lot of oil lately. So I will share my screen and get started. Looks like I have to share my screen first. Hold on. You would think by now I would have this down. Okay, can everybody see the presentation?
We can.
Okay, great. Okay, so I know that this group has been waiting for this information for at least over a year now, so I'm really pleased that we're able to present a large part of the results to you. Very briefly, the presentation today is going to focus on an overview of results from the 10-year data collection of the Forest Health Survey, which, as you know, was first conducted in 2008. I will begin by providing you with a general overview and background of the Forest Health Survey, the study methodology, and then report out on the findings with a specific focus tonight on vegetation and tree canopy. As I walk through the results, I'll also put the findings in context with management practices. I want to note that although we did also collect data on coarse woody debris and other variables, tonight is strictly going to focus on vegetation. So this is going to be review for many of you, but I wanted to do it simply because we do have some new members on the trust board this year. The Forest Health Survey was initiated by the Open Space Conservancy Trust and city staff back in 2008 to gather quantitative data on the levels of invasive and native species within the park, specifically within Pioneer Park, and identify funding levels needed to complete the goals that were set out originally in the Pioneer Park Forest Management Plan. At that time, the city had only conducted a higher level qualitative analysis of invasive plants in Pioneer Park and did not have baseline measurements to track progress in restoration over time or to really assess budget needs. So in 2008, the city worked closely with the Seattle Urban Nature Project, which is actually later became Earth Core Science, to develop the study protocols. The project manager at the time was Paul West, who hired staff to collect data in 2008, one of whom is our own Elaine Summergren, as you know. And I want to just do a quick review of what the primary goals of that project were. So one was to provide a quantitative inventory of native and invasive species in the park. The second goal was to compare the success of previous management efforts. The third was to create a management plan based on the data that was collected, and that would become the Forest Health Plan that we often reference when we're doing our reporting out to the trust board. And the fourth is to estimate the time and costs necessary to meet the project goals laid out in the Forest Management Plan. So the Forest Health Survey included, as I mentioned, a detailed forest health plan that was broken up into short-term, mid-term, and long-term objectives. Short-term objectives focused on essentially reducing the immediate invasive pressure and reducing seed sources. So that's this focus on tasks that both protected the existing tree canopy, such as creating ivy rings and treating invasive trees, as well as invested in establishing the next generation of canopy trees. The midterm objectives, and I have this highlighted in red because this is basically, we're just at the beginning of launching our midterm objectives. This is the phase, oops, sorry about that. This is the phase where we start to become more proactive. This is where we start removing herbaceous weeds from the forest floor, what we refer to as comprehensive invasive removal. This is also where we continue to monitor and treat invasive species along trails, property boundaries, and watercourses. Incidentally, this is something that we've actually done for years, but this is specifically called out as one of the midterm objectives as well. And another objective in this phase is to actually monitor the permanent survey plots to assess progress. And so that brings us to our presentation today and the work that we did back in the summer of 2018 to resurvey those permanent plots. And it was envisioned that this midterm phase would be from about year 10 to 20 in the plan. And then the long-term objectives primarily call for a second phase of conifer planting to take place within 20 to 25 years after the implementation of this plan. Okay, so I'm going to very briefly go over the methodology. I know that Elaine did a much more detailed presentation on this back in 2018 before we actually conducted the data collection. But by way of review, so let's see here. So surveying these permanent plots is an important midterm forest health plan objectives because it basically gives us a report card. The 2018 monitoring effort followed the same methodology as the 2008 study, and the study design includes 56 rectangular, which are shown here in yellow, rectangular plots that represent about 5% of the total acreage of the park. Data collected from within those 10th acre plots included looking at canopy trees, regenerating trees, dead and decaying wood, such as standing snags and coarse woody debris, and then the presence of ivy on trees. Now within those 10th acre plots, there were 5 subplots where data was collected. These were 5 by 5 meter squares where we collected slightly different data looking at canopy cover over the subplot, the percent cover of shrubs and herbaceous plants, the presence or absence of animal or pet waste, as well as looking at the duff layer. So as I mentioned earlier, today's report out will focus specifically on the results of the tree canopy, regenerating trees, and other vegetation data. I'm planning to cover some of the questions raised and challenges in the data and put some of the results in context with our restoration practices from the last 10 years. Okay, so let's start with looking at canopy trees. So canopy trees refers to any evergreen or deciduous overstory tree that measures greater than 5 inches DBH or diameter at breast height. All trees under 5 inches were considered regenerating trees, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. So the 2018 data demonstrates that the canopy in Pioneer Park continues to be dominated by native conifer and deciduous species with an average density of 89 stems per acre. I don't know, can you see my mouse from my computer? Does that translate onto, wish I had a pointer. But that is what you see represented on the far right side of the chart. And I know that you can see this, but the 2008 data is represented by blue bars, and then the 2018 data is in orange. So native trees, conifer, deciduous, and broadleaf evergreen represented 97% of the canopy trees documented in the park, whereas introduced invasive species represented only 3%. The slight decline in stems and then if you look underneath the native section, you will notice that there was a slight decrease in native conifers in trees per acre from 54 to 51 trees per acre, just a slight shift. And that could be due in part to the tree failures that we're seeing caused by laminated root rot or storm-related damage. And that could be why we were seeing that slight decrease there. But we did have an increase in deciduous trees, according to the data. So in the end, we still ended up with not losing any of our native canopy. So in terms of introduced species, And I'm going to refer to them as introduced species throughout this presentation, but what I'm referring to there are the non-native invasive trees that we typically treat, and that refers to English holly and other invasive trees, the bird cherry. So the data shows a decrease in introduced broadleaf evergreen trees, namely English holly, from 3 stems per acre to 1 stem per acre, which is likely a result of the invasive tree treatments we've been doing over the last 10 years. The slight increase in deciduous introduced species such as bird cherry may be due in part to the focus on English holly and cherry laurel treatments during that first big invasive tree treatment push that was done between 2008 and 2010. I want to make a note that the introduced conifer that's represented on this graph is actually Sequoia sempervirens, or coast redwood, that was planted by a city arborist many moons ago. So this is not considered an invasive threat and was not documented during the 2008 data collection process, but it did make it onto our chart tonight. So I just want to speak to that, that conifer is actually not invasive and not a concern. Okay, so if we look specifically at the species in the 2018 data, this demonstrates that Douglas fir and bigleaf maple are the 2 most commonly documented species, with western hemlock and red alder tied at 3rd. Other native conifer, so all the native conifers together represent about 56% of the canopy, as I mentioned earlier, and the native deciduous species make up about 40%. The introduced holly species represents only 1% of the canopy, with deciduous introduced species representing 2%. Okay, moving on to regenerating trees. As I noted earlier, regenerating trees are those that are 5 inches in DBH or less. And based on the current data, density and composition of regenerating trees shows an overall positive trend. So native tree regeneration appears to have increased, while densities of broadleaf evergreen invasives, while still considerable, have declined. Holly in 2008 represented 899 stems per acre across all the study plots, whereas in 2018, we only saw 502 stems per acre. For native regeneration in 2008, 104 stems per acre were found across study plots versus 257 stems per acre in 2018. So a couple of important points that I want to pull out from this data. First thing is that there actually was 1 error made during the data collection process. Well, there are always errors made in the process of data collection that we need to address throughout the process. But specifically in 2008, there were 3 species that were collected as shrubs in the subplots where they were measured as % cover. But in 2018, those shrubs actually got erroneously documented as trees in stems per acre. And those species include cherry laurel, so the Prunus Herbaceous, Prunus lusitanica, and Acuba japonica. So those are, so unfortunately, this means that we could not do an apples to apples comparison between the 2008 and 2018 data on those specific species. And unfortunately, that was something that was only discovered kind of at the end of the field season after the staff had completed their work. Second, I want to address why the amount of introduced broadleaf evergreens, such as the English holly, is still relatively high given that all the invasive tree treatments we've invested in over the last 10 years. Oop. Oh, there are my, oh, now my boxes are showing up. Sorry about that. So invasive tree treatment. So during the first round of invasive tree treatments, the widely accepted method for treating English holly was frilling. And for those of you that were on the trust board a couple of years ago, you may remember a presentation that I gave at that time that went into the details of invasive tree treatment and the update that we did to our herbicide protocols as a result. I believe that was back in 2016. But basically, frilling was effective in killing the main trunk or stem of the invasive tree, but would not fully impact the root system. And English holly and large shrubs such as cherry laurel have a propensity to develop stump or stem sprouts within the first year or two after treatment when frilled or simply cut down. So within a year or two of the treatment, we would find the main stem of the holly tree had successfully died off, but then there was now a large collection of small holly stems that had sprouted up all around it. Under our Forest Health Survey data collection protocols, these resprouts in 2018 were then counted as individual regenerating trees. And then on this slide on the left, you'll see I show the frilling methodology, and then below it is a little picture, and I circled it in red, of an example of the holly sprouts that we would see. So let's see here. And then, you know, with the shift to using the EasyJect lance, you know, we would start to see some more success in our invasive tree treatments, and we didn't actually see that same stump sprouting that we saw with the frilling. In the future, we would expect to see a sharp decrease in regenerating introduced tree species due to that shift in this best practice. And I'll note briefly that in 2013, Earth Core Science led a study, which Mercer Island actually participated in, that showed a notable increase in invasive tree treatment effectiveness using this EasyJect lance. And so, as I mentioned, the EasyJect lance, which is shown here on the slide and on the right, delivers crystallized herbicide directly into the trunk of the tree and was much more successful at translocating into the root system. And so the Mercer Island Natural Resources Program started widely using EasyJect across all its open spaces to treat invasive trees in 2014. And then in 2016, the Trust Board officially adopted this new practice for its herbicide protocols. So in light of the new effective EasyJect tool, we would expect to see a sharp decrease in regenerating holly, you know, in the next 5 to 10 years. The good news, all that said, is that even with the challenges here with the stump sprouting issue, the data actually still demonstrated that we saw a decrease in English holly regeneration. Okay, so going back to our average density chart on regenerating trees, I'd like to discuss the native regenerating trees. As I mentioned, the data describes an increase in both coniferous and deciduous native trees with an overall native regeneration density of 265 stems per acre. And this is due in large part to the phase 1 planting efforts conducted between 2008 and 2018 that I mentioned that were part of the short-term objectives. However, the restoration program did see some challenges regarding planting efforts. One of the big challenges we saw was low plant survivorship on some of the large-scale planting sites due to increasing summer drought. This led the restoration program to adapt its planting and maintenance practices to include watering the summer following planting when feasible and if the site was accessible enough. And we also had to do some additional maintenance in some areas where blackberry was particularly robust. But by adapting our planting and maintenance practices, you know, we're hoping to see an increase in survivorship of installed plant stock moving forward. We've incorporated plant survivorship surveys into our planting maintenance practices so that we continue to track planting success closely and adapt our restoration practices accordingly. So we could speculate that the native tree regeneration numbers would have been higher if we didn't have those challenges. However, despite those challenges, the data still showed that native tree regeneration increased from 104 stems per acre to 265 stems per acre. So despite some losses on a few sites, we're still seeing some measurable positive impact from the investments that we're making in native canopy reestablishment through planting. I really should have kept using my clicker's not working for me tonight. Okay, so so before we leave the topic of regenerating canopy, I just wanted to take a look at the breakout by species from 2018. So these represent the top 5 species of both native regenerating trees and introduced trees. So we'll see that holly appears to loom large over all of the other species. But taken as a whole, I think it's important with everything that I just discussed, that we remember that there was a significant decrease, between 2008 and 2018. So our top regenerating species for native species was Acer macrophyllum, or bigleaf maple, and Thuya plicata, which is our western red cedar. And this also actually reflects our planting practices, because we are typically underplanting with western red cedar, in our restoration sites. Okay, moving on, the data for both shrubs and herbaceous plants were collected from within those 5 by 5 meter subplots that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Percent cover of each species present was determined using ocular estimates, and then the percent cover estimates were then averaged by plot across each of the subplots. So this chart includes the 5 species with the highest percent cover across all the plots. The data indicates that Himalayan blackberry cover remained relatively constant throughout the park. And in general, actually native shrub cover also appeared relatively constant. So we did not see a lot of change in terms of our shrub layer. Okay, and for herbaceous plants, English ivy cover showed an increase as recorded in 2018 compared to 2008. Native cover and composition remained relatively constant, but we were disappointed to see that jump in the ground ivy percent cover. We are likely seeing this largely because, we have not been investing in comprehensive invasive removal of ground ivy as part of the restoration practices to date yet. The focus during the past 10 years has been on, as I mentioned earlier, removing ivy from trees, invasive tree treatment, and the first round of planting. During the next 10 years, where we move into the midterm objectives, this is when we start to tackle the ground invasives. And so we're going to be, investing our restoration dollars into that comprehensive invasive removal task that we've been discussing over the past couple of meetings. And so in another 10 years, when we conduct the next round of monitoring, we are expecting to start seeing that English ivy cover decrease. Okay, so to summarize the vegetation data, I wanted to mention that during the survey, the data showed 81 different species in the 2018 survey, documented across all of the plots. The density of native canopy species remained constant, while the density of invasive canopy species decreased. The density and composition of regenerating trees showed overall positive trends, with a decline in broadleaf evergreen invasive trees such as English holly. The percent cover of ground ivy showed an increase compared to 2008, and the native herbaceous and shrub cover and composition remained relatively constant. So also just to recap the lessons learned and adaptive management strategies that I mentioned earlier, I want to note that the restoration program has been tracking and responding to management challenges even well before we had this 10-year data. This 10-year monitoring data in some ways reflects what we have been seeing on the ground. You know, and I think a question we ask is, you know, how do we expect the vegetation results to manifest in the next 20-year data collection? So what are our expected future outcomes? You know, changes in invasive tree treatment will hopefully continue to yield positive results, and we will see that broadleaf evergreen introduced category go down significantly. Summer drought and well-draining soils will continue to be a challenge in plant establishment. We don't think that problem is going away, and we will continue to evaluate best practices for watering and planting maintenance, though we do expect to continue to see increases in native tree regeneration. With the implementation of the second tier of forest health plan objectives and the comprehensive ground invasive removal, again, we do expect to see a marked decrease in ground ivy cover. So that is what I have for you this evening. I am happy to answer your questions or to clarify any points made. I know that's a lot of bar charts, and but I really played around with a lot of different ways to present the data and just felt like that was the most straightforward, so that you could see the 2008 right next to the 2018 and have it be really clear.
Yeah, that was good. Was there any data from satellites or aerial photos that were used to supplement the survey, just looking at the forest health from the standpoint of overall vegetative health or you know, leaf cover?
Yeah, that was not used for this study. There was some aerial, and Elaine, maybe you can speak a little bit more to this, but there was some aerial data that was used in the development of the Pioneer Park Forest Management Plan, but this was specifically data that was collected from plots, from the ground.
Data plots, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we do have that initial LiDAR analysis that was done, you know, that predates the Forest Health Survey in 2008. We have not discussed going back and having a comparative LiDAR study done, but it's certainly something we could look to in the future when that study was originally done with LiDAR. So that's the imaging that really looks at where there's canopy gaps and the density of the canopy over the whole landmass. It was really, you know, I believe that when Paul was working on that, it was really focused on these canopy gaps and looking at the root rot issues and how they were affecting the health of the whole canopy there. So less sort of fine-grained and more landscape scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that was the impetus for doing this forest health survey, is because most of the data that they had was more landscape scale. It was more qualitative, and that doesn't actually allow you to do the kind of analysis and budget planning and then monitoring, you know, of what's happening on the ground in the long term. Are there any other questions?
Couple questions, Kim.
Okay, is that Hillary?
It is, yes.
Okay, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see people. Let me. Okay, does anybody know? Oh, here we go. It's on the other screen. There we go.
Thank you so much, by the way. I know that's a tremendous amount of work, so we really appreciate all of your efforts. And you too, Elaine, thank you. Kim, my questions
Welcome.
for you are these. One, I was wondering if in surveying some of the standing deadwood of the snags, are you guys looking on the level of like the wildlife activity and which trees are significant wildlife trees or not?
Yeah, I mean, the coarse woody debris and snags are measured in decay classes, which in itself actually tells us, we can make inferences from that about what type of wildlife or insects or decomposers might be using that piece of wood, based on the literature. And so when the staff were out collecting that data, they would put it into one of three decay classes.
Okay, so you can make inferences about like different kinds of nesting activities that you would see in there and all that.
Yeah, I don't believe that they were making note of like the presence of cavities. They weren't going into that level of detail.
No, it was definitely more broad brush than that. So interested, because we know that wildlife tend to be more interested in using larger diameter snags. So looking at really like diameters and the decay class in that way just could indicate more biological activity, but definitely not down to the species scale or cavity.
Yeah.
Specific cavities, anything like that. That would be really interesting to look at. We don't have anyone who's a wildlife expert on staff right now, but I think it's, that's obviously really interesting to us how life's using this.
Right. I'm such a bird nerd, so that's why I asked, there's so much avian activity in all of our parks, so it would be really cool to get an assessment of what's happening with the activity there. I mean, I know that's not something you guys necessarily have time for, but it might be kind of a cool volunteer citizen science opportunity if that were ever possible in the future. So
yeah. I was just about to say, if you know of a grad student that has some funding and they need a study site, we'll happily oblige.
I'll look into it. I definitely will. The second question was, I was wondering if you're seeing any of the Western red cedar dieback that's being studied out of WSU and whether that's a concern in our parks yet or not, and if so, at what scale?
I would say that at this point, we are seeing Western red cedar dieback anecdotally and kind of qualitatively on some sites. I'm not actually seeing it widespread at Pioneer Park. There are some patches in other parks, especially there's one actually at Upper Luther Burbank Park where we just had 3, teenage trees die out of the blue,
Wow.
And so that's something that we're of course very concerned about. And it's something that, we don't have a study in place or a specific monitoring plan in place to start looking at that quantitatively, but it's something that both our urban forestry specialist and I have been aware of and kind of tracking just in our general assessments and in our work planning.
Yeah.
I
think that's a great question, Hillary, because we have seen it in some places in our parks where I just anecdotally have seen it more often is in sites that are a little more exposed, a little more open. Pioneer, we tend to be doing more underplanting in really much more shaded areas where there may be some buffering of that effect, at least right now. I think it's of particular interest. That subject is obviously of particular interest for us in Pioneer Park, and this gets to our species conversation about our species selection. But because Western red cedars is one of our few species that is not as susceptible to our malaria, and so we've, and is more shade tolerant, and so we've really used that quite heavily in the understory and the replanting effort. So this is something we're very, very interested in, figuring out how do we move forward and how does that research inform our species selection going forward.
Great. Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, Jerry, I think you had something.
Thanks. I have 3 also. I wonder if you could go back to your slide for just a minute. And at the beginning of the presentation, you had the map showing the plots.
Sure. Yeah.
Subplots. And I just wondered if you could describe the orange and yellow and green.
Oh, yes. You know what? That was part of my plan. So Jerry, let me go
Excellent.
back to that. It was,
Thanks.
I skipped right over that salient detail. Let me go back here.
It felt like something we would want to know. So
Yes. So let me go back.
really appreciated the presentation. It did have a lot of good information, and I have 2 follow-ons.
Yeah. So these different colors, the green, the orange, and that kind of burnt sienna color, these actually represent different management or restoration management areas that were present at the time in 2008. At the time, there were some areas that were engaged in comprehensive restoration because there had been canopy gaps brought on by a lot of tree failure from a big storm. The areas in green specifically, basically did not have any restoration going on in them. Those were considered like a control, basically the control. Mm-hmm. And then the areas in the burnt sienna, oh, hold on just a second here, represent kind of more selective restoration. And then the areas in orange represent areas where they were getting comprehensive restoration. So these were areas where they had seen significant tree loss. I guess they called it the Hanukkah Eve storm back in the day, you know, for those that remember that. And so that's what that color shading represents. And at the time that the study was set up, they wanted to make sure to have plots in all of these representative areas. I didn't analyze the data based on these management prescriptions for the 2018 data because they're not really applicable anymore. We have moved forward with restoration and different management practices based on the Forest Health Plan, you know, since that time. And so those management designations no longer really applied. I just decided to use the same slide from back in the day. So truth be told, I borrowed this slide from a much older presentation because it already had the plots.
And it's not relevant.
Slide. Yeah. So yeah. So it's not relevant. But I even had it on my slide. It says sampling zones and habitat types and restoration activities. But I jumped ship on that one.
Thanks.
So
no,
thanks for having us circle back, Jerry. I appreciate that.
In the way that Hillary was asking about the Western red cedar, I appreciated a couple meetings ago or last meeting you talking about the sword ferns, and so this highlights that we haven't had that sword fern issue here that is a problem at Seward Park.
No, and actually the data does show that we still have we haven't seen a decline in sword fern cover, you know, from this study.
So the last question I have may be a comprehensive kind of question. I don't know if you can answer it on the spot, but when you laid out the 4 parts goals, I think, of the Forest Health Plan, the first one was to be able to estimate the time and resources needed to meet the goals that were set. And I wondered, didn't really see anything about finances. I wondered if the city, I'm sure the city never has enough money, but I wondered how that financial aspect fit into this. And
that is an excellent question, Jerry. And it is one that I do not have an answer for this evening, but I very much appreciate it. And, you know, honestly, we have not done an analysis of our finances or of the budget based on that earlier budget. So that is something that we should probably do, you know, and we'll.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm looking at Elaine in my computer going, whoa.
I'm happy to speak to it, just at least for a second, which is that, you know, I think that when this study was crafted in 2008 and the management plan was written up, this was obviously a really important piece of it, because we wanted to find out whether it was even attainable and what the level of funding that would be needed in order to realistically chip away at this. But the truth of it is that, the 2008 was a snapshot in time, and it was a snapshot in time of what our bidding climate was. And bidding climates are fickle things, and they go up and they go down depending on the economy and the local economy and the number of restoration practitioners. And we have ridden those waves over the years. For example, I think there's some really good ones in this last 10 years that are actually captured within this 10 years of data, which is that when the forest health plan came out in 2000, I think it was adopted in 2009 and really kicked into high gear, we were just in the beginning of the recession. And the result was that the bidding in climate was incredible. We had not planned to do as much of tree treatment, invasive tree treatment, as we actually got done, because the cost came in so low. And so we were able to just bite off an enormous amount of work within those first 2 years when we were able to really capitalize on that. And then there was a shift several years later where we found that in fact, even when we wanted to do comprehensive invasive removal, we couldn't afford it on the per acre basis that it was coming in from contractors. And so, I think at this point, I don't know how much value there is in looking at those costs. I think what Kim has continued to report on, and what we continue to report on, which is the targets of the number of acres of different activities that we're doing, and doing an annual check-in to find out how far off are we on a particular activity, and do those balance out over time. And so I think that's actually a much more useful metric for us at this point in terms of, are we on track? I think maybe an analysis of where the money is would be more about, how good we were at forecasting the economy. And I will say, as the person who did those calculations, probably not perfect. So we'll stick with the acreage metrics for now.
I have a question that's kind of tangential to, I guess, some of this discussion about money also. I guess the learning I would ask is, are we making the progress that was desired? And if the answer is yes, could we do better? And I think to that point, it might be useful, to see, well, here's where the targets were, and, here's where we are, and I understand, that you don't have control over the money, but obviously, all of this is being done to show the effectiveness of the programs that were put into place, and those programs do come with a budget. So I guess there might need to be some musing about, have we accomplished what we set out to accomplish? And is it good enough? Could we be doing more? Because we can always do more, right? But it always costs more to do more. So, so I think a lot of these items do end up being interrelated. And I understand, the reluctance to look at, the dollars, but maybe, if you think that there were differences in the economy, you could even look at, epochs, what happened, in this 3-year period versus, this 3-year period, and an opportunity then to go back and say, well, what are the learnings from that? What did we do so much better at, if we see that something's happening better during, one time period versus another. Well, it's not a question, I guess it's just amusing.
No, I think that's a really good point, Carol. I mean, I think looking back at how we predicted it is, part of the story. But I totally agree that looking at the amount of money that has actually been put into restoration in the park so far, and assessing, how does this progress measure up with that is a very legitimate question. It's one we have not explicitly explored yet, but we certainly can.
Yeah, I think actually that would dovetail really well into what's in our annual report already, which is we planned on doing this many tree rings, but we got that many done. But what we didn't do in the annual report is put any dollar numbers associated with those achievements.
Mm-hmm.
That might actually be really helpful in terms of just our budget requests.
Yeah, I think so too, Marie. I think that, you know, the obvious question, if one says, well, you said you were going to do 5 and you only did 3, you know, it really doesn't reflect that there's an inability or an incapability
Right.
of the group. I think what it reflects is there's significant, you know, financial limitations. And I think we do need to speak to that, you know, so there's an understanding that if, you know, we're here, but we'd prefer to be there, you know, there is an investment that has to happen in order to make that work.
Greg, did you have anything you wanted to say? Okay, well, I had a couple of questions. First is ignorance. Kim, I assume when you're talking about stems, you're talking about trunks? Okay. You're on mute. I got it, but Kim, you're on mute.
Yeah, so stems are, trees have stems too. Yeah.
Well, I know, that's what I was confused
They're just
about.
very big
Branches
stems.
are becoming trunks.
Yeah, so that's it's typically when you're referring to tree density, you refer to it in stems per acre. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And then,
So yes.
a thought on the use of the word regeneration. So I assume that when you're talking about non-natives, you mean a seed flew off and sprouted. Whereas for the most part, when you're talking about natives, you're probably talking about things that we planted. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it's very possible that some of the regenerating conifers could have been seeds that were, you know, yeah, as well. But knowing, but just knowing that native trees often have a hard time regenerating in an ivy, you know, dominated understory. We're making the assumption that a lot of the regenerating conifers that we're seeing out there we're likely, you know, planting. We're planting. So I think that it's a combination of both. I think that a large part of it is from our planting efforts, but then there also was probably some natural regeneration. But I think what we know about the impact of invasive species like blackberry and ivy is that they tend to suppress the natural regeneration of our native conifers. And so that's why I make the assumption that the increase in our stems per acre of regenerating conifers was due in part to our actual planting efforts. Does that get to what
the reason I brought it up is because to me that means our efforts to get rid of the ivy and the blackberry is not just they're not native, it's that they are having a significantly detrimental impact on the forest.
Oh yes, definitely. That is the main reason.
Well, because if our numbers are not that different from 10 years ago, that means death and planting are kind of equal.
Say that last part again.
We didn't have a huge increase in the number of native trees. So my sort of what I extrapolate from that is death of trees and replanting of trees are not that, they're sort of equal, with a little bit better on the side of new trees, but we're losing trees.
But the death of which trees? The death of
so if I can't remember the numbers exactly, but there's like, I don't know, the difference between 2008 and 2009 is maybe 20 trees.
I can go ahead and bring up the slide again so you
Okay,
can tell me what
yeah.
you're referring to specifically. Elaine, did you have a thought? Did you have a question
Well,
there?
I assume this is specifically about regenerating trees, and the difference between native conifer regeneration in 2008 and 2018 is 24 stems an acre to 76 or 79 stems an acre. So that's a threefold increase in native conifers. So I don't think.
Maybe the bar charts were confusing me.
Okay, and I did something wrong here when I shared my screen. Hold on just a second. I picked the wrong
actually would
screen.
love it, Kim, if you would share this presentation with us,
Sure, I'd be happy to.
because it's really great. It's a really great summary.
I don't know why I'm having a hard time showing my screen now, but let me try this again. I don't know what's going on. Bear with me. I can't quite figure out what's happening here. Okay. I'm doing the same thing I did the last time, but it's screen 2. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
We can
Okay.
see it. It's not in presentation mode, but that's.
Oh, there you go.
There you are.
Okay. All right. So let's go back to regenerating trees. So here's our regenerating tree density by species type. So,
Oh, okay. Now that I see the slide again, I see your point. And it's not the dire straits. We flip through these things so fast. It's hard to remember what bar you saw.
yeah, no, and I realized that they're all, I kept them the same color because I wanted the colors to represent the years,
Yeah.
and so it might
Yeah.
have gotten confusing. So it probably would help to just be able to look through this at your leisure and really take a look at it. So yeah, I don't think that I would say that the death of trees is outpacing, regeneration.
No.
I think that that far right orange bar where it says under total native, where it says 265 trees per acre. I mean, that, getting back to your other question, I mean, that represents a combination, that difference between 104 stems per acre and 265 represents a combination of planting efforts and natural regeneration.
Okay.
And the decrease in the introduced species, that is definitely a result from our invasive tree management efforts,
Right.
rather than from natural die-off.
So then another thought I was wondering is we've sort of generalized all of this to numbers per acre.
Mm-hmm.
Were we able to sort of, instead of assuming that everything is equally the same across the whole area, sort of identify areas where we really need to put some effort into? Or is that something outside of this? I mean, I know all along you guys have been identifying areas and focusing replanting.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be interesting to know, to have like a map of knowing where in the parks that effort is circulating to.
Yeah, so these, the data was actually averaged across all of the plots. So this basically tells us, how we have it represented here shows us for the whole park. And so it's not, so what's interesting is that, we could go back and look at the plots that happen to fall in a specific area unit. It may not necessarily be representative of what's happening in that entire area unit.
Mm-hmm.
The idea behind this is that, we're able to extrapolate,
Right.
the data from this plot across all of the acres. So, it could, in some cases it could be instructive about, where we need to, be planting more, but the nature of the data collection, doesn't really lend itself to that. We tend to get more you know, when we do our assessments, it's because we're actually, you know, when I do an assessment, when I'm creating a scope of work for restoration, I'm generally walking transects through an area unit and, you know, walking along the perimeter and making observations that way. It's much more, and you know, more intensive on the ground assessment versus going from a data set like this.
Well,
Are there any other questions? I'm keeping the slides up just in case someone else has a question about the slides after how hard it was for me to get it back up.
I'm done. Anybody
Okay.
else? Well, thank you, Kim.
You're welcome.
For those of us who've been around for a while, we know what a long-term effort and how difficult it's been to just get to the work and analyze the data.
Yeah, and I do want to acknowledge that we did have support and help with the data analysis from Earth Core Science. The senior ecologist there, Nelson Salisbury, helped us with the analysis. So that was very helpful. We ultimately had to hire someone because Elaine and I just haven't had a minute in our work plan. I did spend a lot of time with the data last week, and also talking with Nelson and, you know, really dissecting everything and running some of the numbers myself, because I was surprised at how some of the things were coming out and, you know, wanted to understand the data more personally. But I'm very grateful to Nelson. And interestingly enough, he was actually the staff ecologist for Seattle Urban Nature Project in 2008, who helped with the study design.
Oh,
so it really came, so he was, so we were able to actually have the ecologist who worked with the original project come back and do that data analysis, which was wonderful, you know, because he had all that history. So we were very grateful to him for that.
Okay, well, thank you. Is there also a written report?
There is
I mean, not that I'm asking you to do work, I'm just asking.
Yeah, we don't have a written report that is ready for you right now. Nelson did give us a brief write-up, but it really needs to be, I would actually rather use the charts and some of the interpretation that we've done. You know, Nelson didn't actually give us like detailed analysis of what everything means, right? He ran a lot of the queries and the numbers for us. So unfortunately, we didn't put this in a staff report today. But if that's something down the road that you would like, you know, we could certainly start with giving you the PowerPoint presentation and then look at in the future, writing up a summary piece.
I mean, all the details you've just given us are very valuable and they're stuck right here now. Okay, next thing on the letterboxing.
Actually, we actually have the 2021 restoration work plan.
I was confusing the two. You're right. The 2021 restoration work plan. Perfect.
I know how excited you are to hear me continue to talk tonight.
Absolutely.
Can I jump in for 1 second, Kim, on this?
Yes, please.
Just to finish up that last bit. So we will plan to actually do a 20-year data collection. I know we're already in 2021, but that is due in 2028. So at this time, at least, you know, assuming that we have the funding to do that, we'll look at collecting the data under the same protocols for 2028. And we've learned some lessons from this 10-year data collection. And so we're looking forward to also to seeing what that looks like after the midterm objectives have really taken place. So.
Okay. Great, thank you, Elaine. Okay, are we ready?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So each year, city staff report to the trust board on planned forest restoration activities in Pioneer Park and Angstrom open space. Forest management activities are guided, as you know, by the Pioneer Park Forest Health Plan and the 10-year update to the open space vegetation management plan that was approved by City Council in 2015. Restoration activities that I will go over today are performed by professional contractors, seasonal crew members, as well as natural resources staff and volunteers. However, due to continued COVID-19 programmatic changes at Earth Corps, the city has not secured a professional services agreement for volunteer management services for 2021 yet. Natural resources staff will be working with Earth Corps in the next couple of months to develop a plan for revised volunteer event offerings, similar to what we did back in the summer of 2020. However, things are very up in the air with Earth Corps right now, and I can speak to that in more detail later if you would like. So in 2021, professional contractor work is scheduled in all 3 quadrants of Pioneer Park and Angstrom. In Pioneer Park, work will largely focus on launching comprehensive invasive removal efforts as outlined in the Pioneer Park Forest Health Plan. So the following contractor work is currently, so everything I'm going to talk about today is actually currently out to bid. My bids are literally due tomorrow at 1 p.m. If the bids come in within budget, the contracts will be awarded in late March. Field work is slated to begin in late April and continues through the end of the year. And staff will update the trust board if the work plan changes due to any budgetary constraints based on how these bids come in. Okay, so I'm going to work my way through the quadrants and let you know what activities we have planned for each. So for the Northwest quadrant, contractor work is going to focus on ivy rings in this teal section labeled PP 2001. And I'll just make a note that these codes are area unit numbers. And this is how we track our work by using these codes, part of our data management system. And so invasive removal maintenance is scheduled again in 1902A. For those of you that remember, I actually had this on the schedule last year as well. That area is an old comprehensive restoration site that was part of that older push to do comprehensive in areas where we had had some tree failure. And it hadn't had maintenance in a long time and it was in pretty bad shape. And so I'm having crews go in there again to really try to get it back up to the standard that we want our comprehensive sites to be in when they're in long-term maintenance. You will also notice the red circles. These are the 2 areas that we planted last year that I think most people on the board are pretty familiar with. One is the one in the northwest corner is the 2020 Arbor Day site that we planted with Earth Corps behind the what I call the Elliott fence, the fence that was installed by the Boy Scout troop. And then the second one is that area that is along the woodpecker and dogwood trails that falls within, also right next to the Don Cohen bench. And so that area is also going to get watered. Mm-hmm. So for natural resources crew work, their efforts this year, I'm so excited that we have our natural resources crew coming back, by the way. We're going to get caught up on some activities that we didn't get done last year. We're going to be doing yellow archangel monitoring and treatment along the private property boundary, so along that north boundary. And then I'm also going to be actually having the natural resources crew engaged in planting maintenance of last year's planting sites. So we're having contractors water those sites, but I'm going to have our crew go in and just do a quick check to check on mulch and reflag everything so that the professional contractors know exactly which plants to water. For volunteer stewardship, as I mentioned, this is anticipated in summer 2021. The work areas where Earth Corps typically works is along the west boundary between 84th Avenue Southeast and the Perimeter Trail. I spoke with the operations manager from Earth Corps last week, and it sounds like they are actually in the process of evaluating their volunteer management program and what it's going to look like for the rest of the year. And so I'm expecting to hear back, or, you know, city staff are expected to hear back in the next month about what their capacity is. I will tell you that it's going to look very, very different from past years. And the natural resources program will have to adjust our volunteer efforts, you know, because of that. And so that's kind of, so you could expect an update at the next trust board meeting about plans with Earth Corps and volunteer stewardship there. Okay, moving on to the Northeast Quadrant.
May I ask a clarifying question?
Oh,
Is
yes, yes.
completely pandemic related? I mean, social distancing and.
Yes, it was really driven by the pandemic completely. I mean, well,
Thanks.
I think that they're using it as it was definitely driven by the pandemic, but I think that they also are their organization is in a time of change, and they are doing some kind of visioning about where they want to take their organization. And so this really gave them the opportunity to do that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so in the Northeast Quadrant, we're actually going to relaunch larger scale planting efforts this year. This area unit here in blue, PP1004A, is actually one of those sites that we planted many years ago where we had some challenges. And we're going to try again, except this year, of course, we're going to be watering at the time of installation, and then next year watering will be on the docket for that site. It's kind of a harder site to reach, so watering's probably going to be spendy. I'm really curious to see where the bids come in for this planting, but it's an area where we're not seeing a lot of native regeneration and natural regeneration, and so I really wanted to make an effort this year to have a second go at this site. And then the area unit along the north boundary, which is Pioneer Park, PP 1004D as in dog along the top, we're going to do invasive tree treatment there. And that's an area that hasn't had work recently. And so I have that as part of our regular invasive tree treatment schedule for that. And again, the natural resources crew will be monitoring for yellow archangel along that boundary, as well as a small area to the east. It's basically, I have them check everywhere we have a private property boundary for garden escapees, essentially. Okay, so going to the Southeast Quadrant, this is where the big meaty stuff could happen. I'm really, really hoping that the bids come in favorably, but this is where we're going to launch comprehensive restoration again. I have 4 different area units slated for comprehensive, and they are the ones in kind of pink, green, orange, and blue along this west side of the area unit. The natural resources crew, I want to say I don't have them working over every square inch of the area in yellow, but I highlighted it because that's a lot of where their work sites are going to be. Pardon me. I'm going to be having them doing some planting maintenance in that area highlighted in yellow, PP 1002, A, B, and C. There are some, I didn't feel like I could justify planting maintenance across that whole site because some parts of it are actually in pretty good shape. And I felt like it would have been a waste of money to have the entire area done by contractors. So what I'm doing is I'm having the seasonal crew kind of do surgical planting maintenance in areas where we have a lot of blackberry overtaking. So that'll be hopefully a meaty project, but manageable for the crew. And again, they'll be hitting the yellow archangel along that southern boundary, and then doing knotweed monitoring and any treatment. And the knotweed populations marked here by that little red triangle, I realized after that didn't make it onto the maps in your staff report, so I apologize. But I did add it for the presentation so that you could see exactly where it is. I will note that we haven't seen knotweed on that area in a couple of years now, so I'm feeling pretty hopeful that we've actually taken care of that. But we will continue to monitor it and treat it as we see it. But we've had success with the knotweed treatment right there. Okay, last but not least, Angstrom open space. EN 1001A is one of our comprehensive sites within Angstrom, and so that has already had 3 years worth of work, and so we're going in. It's now on a regular maintenance rotation, and so I'm having contractors go in there, and then we're going to do some ivy ring creation in 1001C. Okay, does anyone have any questions for me? And I might just, I think I might just keep the presentation up in case someone wants me to go back to a slide. unless you feel good and I can take it down.
I think it was pretty self-explanatory. It's a lot of work, and I'm really glad to see more work going on in Northeast and Southeast. They seem to be overlooked too often.
Yeah. Well, we did have a huge push last year in the Southeast to do ivy rings. I think we actually had work in almost every area unit, but I think that because it wasn't comprehensive, I think that it maybe wasn't as visibly noticeable, but yes, I think that for a while there, we were really focusing on the Northwest and the Northeast, especially with planting efforts and maintenance. Are there any other specific questions, Craig?
Yeah, I have a question. Actually, two. How actually do you remove blackberries? I mean, do the crews cut them out and then pull them out? And then same with ivy. How do you get rid of ivy? I mean, this seems very expensive, I would think.
Yes, it's going to be it can be very expensive, and it depends on the methodology you use. Unfortunately, herbicide's always cheaper. Yeah. But our restoration specification for comprehensive is to actually largely do manual removal.
Wow.
And so there are certain circumstances where we will allow herbicide, for certain species, but those are that's the exception and not the rule for those projects. So they're very labor intensive. With blackberry, they might go in and start by brush cutting the canes if it's a really big monoculture, and then they grub out the roots, with a shovel, and then they pile up the weed debris on rafts or cardboard to keep it out of ground contact so it won't resprout or reroot, and the same thing with the ivy, just grubbing out the roots. I don't know how else to describe it.
I'm not volunteering for that work.
Yeah. But what's interesting about Pioneer Park, I'm sure you've been to some parks where it's just a complete ivy desert where there's nothing else growing. I mean, I see that in a lot of Seattle parks and, other areas. And we have a few areas like that on Mercer Island, but more often than not, especially in Pioneer, it's really integrated with some natives, and so that's one of the challenges with our sites. We can't just do some blanket application of herbicide. We have not that we would ever do that anyway, but I think that it makes it challenging because we want to try to protect the existing native understory that's there. You know, so the one provision I have made, you know, is that if we have some blackberry that's coming up, you know, through native shrubs, and we simply can't reach the, you know, the root system to grub it out, you know, that contractors will have the option to just cut and paint the stems of the blackberry if it's growing up through existing native vegetation. However, that's again the exception. The rule is that they need to be manually removing it, because we've really made a commitment, as we always have, to minimize our herbicide use. Jerry?
Can I just take Craig's line of questioning one for a step further? What is there replanting then that goes in the place of the blackberries or ivies?
So that would be the goal eventually. Yeah, I think that, you know, at first, you know, the way that the process that we have used historically is that we do 3 rounds, or, you know, 3 subsequent years of that comprehensive removal, where there's a lot of impact and boots on the ground to remove the invasives. We also like to see kind of what naturally regenerates, because once we actually open up the space again, you know, we could have a combination of natives and non-natives come back, but we want to also, there also is a native seed bank, you know, hidden under all that as well, you know, and so it could be possible that we could have some natural regeneration of native understory. But yes, Jerry, I think if we have a site that really ends up with a lot of bare ground, we definitely would be replanting in there. And I think that is, you know, just assessed on a case-by-case basis. You know, I think that site by the Dogwood Trail that I was referring to earlier is a good example of where we had a lot of ivy, you know, that got cleared by volunteers. And we were left with a few ferns, but it then looked like an open kind of dog run, right? You know, it ended up being very hospitable to happy pups that wanted to play in the dirt, you know, and so then we ended up needing to go in and actively replant that area. We couldn't wait for it to naturally regenerate. And so, yeah, in some cases, we do need to go in and replant.
I'll jump in a tiny bit on that. So a bit of what's built into the forest health plan is this phasing. And if you sort of looked at a map of it over time, the different activities, they generally start in the southeast quadrant and move into the northeast quadrant and then over to the northwest quadrant over time. So those are sort of, if you can imagine, sort of a wave that moves across the park in that direction. And if you remember that in that the short-term objectives is this replanting, right? This aggressive replanting plan. And that actually happens before comprehensive removal, partially because comprehensive removal is slower and takes more time and is more expensive. And we don't want to wait that long to make sure that we're getting a lot of that regeneration in there, which is why, you know, one of the first things on the plan is really just get new trees in the ground and jumpstart regeneration. But I think, yeah, there are always going to be cases where we're going to need to address it in more depth, or, you know, our focus is really on regenerating trees, but there are definitely some places like these smaller ivy deserts where we would look at doing more shrub incorporation once that comprehensive work is actually pretty well in hand. And I think, you know, like Kim was saying, it's also a really good chance over those 3 years of that comprehensive invasive removal to see what you are getting in your native seed bank. Because, you know, it's very likely that if you remove a lot of ivy and a lot of the stuff that creates shade on the duff layer, that you may actually, and we saw this in Angstrom in a little Paul and I did a little experiment in Angstrom years and years ago. And we actually saw, you know, red elderberry and trillium and all kinds of stuff pop out of the ground. So, you know, we want to give it a chance to be a little exposed and see what comes up. Certainly there's going to be some invasives in there too, but, you know, over the course of these 3 years, we can selectively pull those out and let the natives that come back. So a little tinge of optimism there.
Mhm. Yeah. Nice. Are there any other questions? Okay, well, I will be getting all the bids tomorrow. And then hopefully we'll have some really good news for you in May when we update you.
How about sooner than May? When you know the answer, maybe you'll tell the city council, who knows? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So now it's letterboxing. Is that you, Jerry?
Actually, we need to make a
No, it's
motion.
Elaine. I'm sorry, Craig?
Do we need to make a motion to approve the work plan or?
Oh, you do. Thank you.
good
Yes.
question. Thank you.
Very
I move
important.
approval.
I can
I move
second that.
approval.
Jerry seconded?
Yeah.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Approved. Okay, letterboxing. I seem to be wanting to get to letterboxing.
I hope I don't disappoint you, Marie. So yeah, we have about 20 minutes left. I think we have plenty of time to cover all of this. So I did reach out to our two very dedicated letterboxing program volunteers, Elizabeth Crossnickel and Kim Gordon. I did hear back that they do have the materials for the letterboxing program. We did, so just so you sort of understand what the structure was of the letterboxing program is, although they did a lot of the volunteering and helping with, updating the booklets and getting the Tupperwares with the materials out into the park, they did rely a fair amount on recreation staff who was supporting them not only in the actual printing and the cost of printing the small booklets for letterboxing, but also doing outreach about it. So some publicity about the program and then the distribution of the actual booklets themselves. Without a full recreation program right now, since we're in the recreation reset portion, we basically decided at this point that we don't have the staff resources or the funds available to really support this program on the timeline that we normally would. So normally the letterboxing program would kick off on National Trails Day, which is the first Saturday in June. In talking to Ryan Daly about the recreation, the recreation reset plan, it sounds like there's a possibility that we could bring this back a little bit later in the year once we have a little more staff on board and have a little clearer picture about how recreation programs are going to roll out. This is obviously a really good fit for social distancing and people being outside. So we'd like to find a way to make this happen. Right now, I would say that we're probably looking at an abbreviated season. So possibly something that starts in late summer and goes all the way through the fall. So we'll continue to work with Kim and Elizabeth in as much a manner as they want to be involved in this moving on. And then I'm sure that as we get a clearer picture of what it's going to look like, that there will be opportunities for trustees to participate in the program. And I will certainly let you all know what those are and how you can contribute and gauge interest in that. I may know more by the May meeting and we'll certainly update you. So any questions on letterboxing? All right.
Okay, so the next item is just a report back. So as you all know, the mayor and the city manager organized a meeting for all the chairs of the various boards and commissions. And we spent an hour one afternoon just talking. Basically, the city manager started just letting us know that the city budget is sort of evolving. They focused on what absolutely had to be focused on first, and now they're coming back to sort of work on things like parks and things like that. So we're kind of been teed up for discussion pretty much now. I think what the sort of motivating factor behind this meeting was one of the planning commission. I think he's on the planning commission. Maybe he had just brought up with them with the city council, just sort of the lack of direct communication between boards and commissions and the city council. There had been some sort of miscommunications. And so the thought was, let's have a discussion and sort of get to know each other. The city manager has suggested, and I think it's a really good idea, that she's going to organize a basic template for boards and commissions to use in formulating their recommendations and passing them off to the city council. And you know, Elaine's been really good about bringing our annual report, for example, to us, and at least coordinating with the chairperson to get the final details before she sends it to the city council. But now what we're probably going to do is have a process where those reports actually go back to the commission or board for final approval before it goes to the city council. The other thing is, if there's something important, and that's, I mean, this is less of an issue for us than it is for things like parks and recs and planning and design. If there's a recommendation that goes to the city council that's significant, they're going to start bringing in the chair or the vice chair of that commission to have a discussion with the city council at a city council meeting, so that we're not asking the staff to be the sole spokesperson for whatever they're. In fact, sometimes the staff and the commission may have slightly different views on what the recommendation ought to be. So this will be an opportunity for the commission to speak for itself. Let's see. There was a lot of discussion, and I think it will be really good if we think about this and work hard to do this, about the overlap among the responsibilities of the various boards and commissions. So particularly, I would think of, you know, arts and parks and open space probably have a lot to say to each other. And on reflection, for example, when we put the peace poll, we worked with the citizens for putting a peace poll in the park. It didn't occur to us to say, hey, what does the Arts Commission think? But I also know that the Arts Commission was probably involved in locating peace poles in other parts of the island. So it would have been a really great opportunity to talk to each other. I did bring up the rumor that had been going around about redeveloping the QFC shopping center. As another, to me, that was an example of, if that renovation is going to happen, it's going to have a very dramatic effect on the use and the traffic and just sort of the wildness of the park. So I brought it up as an example of a place where the trust board had a voice. But to my, I'm happy to report, there is no proposal. The best we can figure out is somebody put something on the neighborhood thing and said, let's take a poll. So that's not going to happen, but it's a really good example of the design commission, the planning commission would be, you know, really involved, but they ought to be asking, what would the trust board think of the impact on the park? We talked about meeting formats, and I think there's a lot of support for both Zoom and in person. I mean, kind of the pros and the cons have been, the pros are, it allows an earlier meeting time, so everybody's moved to 5 o'clock. It facilitates participation by people who have concerns like children at home and need to find babysitters. It facilitates public comment. So people can call in on a Zoom call and not have to drive down to City Hall, which I think is a good thing. And some of the chairs thought it actually made the meetings more efficient, in the sense that I think if I read between the lines, they have better control over the meeting. So, in some cases, I mean, that's a good thing from some perspectives. The cons are, it seems to enhance the tendency of quiet people to be quiet and outspoken people to be outspoken. I think the biggest con is that we never see each other in person. So we never have those conversations that come before and after the meetings. I just don't think over Zoom you get to know each other in any sense close to the personal relationship you can develop when you have in-person meetings. It seemed to me like maybe the solution, which is less applicable to us because we only have 4 meetings a year, but City Council meets twice a month, Planning Commission meets once a month. Maybe they'll have some combination of sometimes Zoom, sometimes in person. One thought I had was at least open up the public comment section to a Zoom meeting so that people didn't have to come down. I mean, I don't know about other people, but my experience is people come to City Council, they do their public comment, and then they leave. If that's the general routine, then why not let people just call in? So the council's going to be thinking about it, and we'll see how that all pans out. I'm not going to cover, we did talk about the code of ethics, but Deb's already done a really good job on that. The mayor and the vice mayor both were on the call and wanted to make sure that we all heard their appreciation for the kinds of works that all the volunteers do, that it sometimes goes unnoticed and sometimes it's difficult, and it's definitely a dedication of time for the benefit of the city. So they just wanted to make sure that we knew that we are appreciated. I did, after the meeting, send an email over, and Tom, you'll see that we are now going to get email addresses again, which I think is a good thing. And so we'll see. I think Deb is Deb still here, Alen? So she's going to pick up on that. So
Yes, I am still here.
I think in the fall, they're going to have another similar meeting. Okay, Deb?
Okay. Email addresses and public records requests and board terms. Okay. Email addresses. So as soon as we are ready to go with that, I will send an email to all of you. I believe that IT, there's a couple reasons for this. Let me back up. By giving you all a city email address, it ensures that all of your correspondence is captured on the server, which makes our public records process much, much easier. And we don't have to ask you to send us from your personal email or get a subpoena for your computer or whatever else that might come up. So as soon as that occurs, I will let you know. There'll be simple instructions on how to create a password. And I believe what they might do is there's ways to have it forwarded to your other email. Anyway, when they figure it out, I will share it with you and we'll get you all set up. On a public records level, kind of dovetailing into that, I just want to remind everyone that I know some of you have been on the board for a while. You're going to probably need to take your OPMA training again, and perhaps even public records training again. I will look at the schedule and let you know who needs to have that. And, you know, I live in the public records world all the time, so I don't want to agitate anyone with that. But it's just a good thing to kind of keep yourself abreast of. It's constantly evolving. And the best piece of advice I can give anyone where public records are concerned is don't put anything in an email or a text that you wouldn't feel comfortable sharing on the 6 o'clock news in person. So that's kind of a nice rule of thumb when you're operating in this capacity on an advisory board. And that's about all that I have. You want to lead us into the next one, Elaine?
Can I ask a question? on the emails?
Yes.
So if we want to communicate with our other members on a subject where we don't care if there's a public record request for what we're about to ask or say, it seems to me like that might be an easy way to accomplish joint communication without, causing concern. Shall we say?
Well, if I put my city clerk hat on, the first thing I would say is it's the law. And while you might not care, and I certainly understand, it just seems so annoying sometimes, just always be mindful of that. The advice that I give to people at the city and elsewhere when they're serving on a board or commission is when you go to email your entire group, or you don't want to email everybody individually, let's put it that way, because that's considered a rolling meeting. So what we do with council is, for instance, if I have one council member ask a question, I'll respond to that council member and I'll put the full council in BCC. That way, if they inadvertently respond, they're not all responding to each other and it creates this situation. So that would be my recommendation where that's concerned, is just doing a BCC is safer. And that way it can't be said, even if you don't care, it can't be said that you're in violation of a rolling meeting. So
email Ellen perhaps, but then BCC everybody else.
If it's relevant to everybody else, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Because that way, if somebody responds, or they can only respond to you, Marie, and they can't respond to the full board. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And I will be sending out, as a part of the annual recruitment process, some really good, very short sheets on tips for the OPMA and Public Records Act. That's sometimes just a nice thing to have in your, I don't know, advisory board manual. box of tools.
Thank you.
Okay.
Ellen?
All right. So we're going to continue with Deb here on the board terms. So this is, I believe, a fully up-to-date list of the terms.
Yes. So just a reminder here, and I'm doing this with all the boards and commissions, we have 2 individuals whose terms expire at the end of May. You can send me an email and I can simply pull your past application, or you could fill out a new application assuming that you want to continue on this board, and I will notify the council accordingly. And either way, either your new application or your email needs to be in my inbox before, or on or before May 6th. And so if you do that, I think I've heard from one of you, Marie. I haven't heard from Geraldine if she wants to continue, but just send me an email one way or the other. If you don't intend to continue, that's fine too. Let me know and we will note that accordingly. Any questions about that? All right. Pretty easy.
Okay, thank you.
All right. I'm going to continue with a couple of city updates, just some staffing updates for you all. The first one is that I am really excited to announce that we have promoted one of our internal employees into the position of the Parks Operations Manager. I have a picture of him up here, so if you see him out and about, you will recognize him. So his name is Sam Harb. He's been with the city for almost 6 years. For the first 5 years, he was working on our customer response team. And I don't know if any of you have had a chance to work with him in this capacity in the past, but it's really responding to just absolutely everything that comes up all over the island, any requests and or complaints or comments. he was out working on them all over the island. And what it meant was that he really just got to know the community very well, got to know the island very well, and just the customer base. And so he's just really well versed in being responsive and you know, just being really well versed in all of the city systems. So he was actually recently promoted to our sewer foreman back in October of last year. And we quickly swiped him for this new position, replacing the position that I am vacating in parks. I think this will be a really good and natural transition for him. I think he's going to step into the role really quickly. I will be alongside him, working with him. Ultimately, he will end up being the liaison for the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board, but I don't anticipate that happening really immediately at all. He has quite a bit to get up to speed on, and a lot of vacant positions within the parks operations team that we're really going to be focusing on filling, and then, you know, looking at what this full transition looks like. So I do expect that he will start attending meetings, so you all will get to meet him, and we'll start to do that handoff slowly over time. I'm hoping that he'll be able to make it to the May meeting. I will note that Sam is an avid mountain man. He is very well steeped in all things nature. He's an avid hiker, and he's also up in the snow quite a bit during the winter season. So he's a big user of trails, and has some history in restoration and wildlife. So I think he'll be a really good fit. He will officially start in his capacity as Parks Operations Manager next Monday, the 22nd of March. And so I'm hoping that we'll get a chance for you to meet him, if not sooner, at least in May. So if you hear from him, now you know who he is. So big congratulations to Sam. On the not as happy news, I have the unfortunate news that Kim will be moving on from her position as our natural resources specialist. This coming Tuesday will be her last day. And I am just really sad to say goodbye to Kim. Kim has been just an amazing partner in the natural resources work, and has contributed just such an incredible amount to all of our natural resources work, but particularly in Pioneer Park and Angstrom Open Space, and continuing to move that program forward. I can't even begin to enumerate all the ways that Kim has made our program more robust and more accessible to the public. And I'm just so grateful. And I know you all are too. So I will, I know, Hillary, that you have a letter that hopefully you're prepared to read. So I will hand it off to you.
Thank you, Elaine. And Kim, similar to Elaine, you know, I'm new to this board, but I'm not new to a relationship with you, and everything that you do for natural resources in this city and this community. It's just, it's so hard to describe. I think what you have done and your accomplishments, and how much respect we all have for you. And Marie asked me to write a letter on behalf of the board that we're going to forward to council as to express our gratitude for everything that you mean to us and to the city. So here we go. Dear council, the Open Space Conservancy Trust would like to thank Kim Frappier, Natural Resources Specialist, for her years of dedicated service and partnership in restoring Pioneer Park and Angstrom Open Space. Kim's commitment to forest health and to the Mercer Island community are evident in all that she does. Whether coordinating volunteer planting events, managing subcontractor restoration bids, or advising trustees on scientifically informed management decisions. It is just as common to see her staging hundreds of plants for a weekend volunteer event as it is to find her collecting field data for the city's forest health survey or building a fence to protect newly planted areas. Kim invests significant time in enhancing trustees' ecological knowledge to help inform our management decisions. Whether presenting to us about regional sword fern die-off, guiding us through a local preserve with Elaine Margren, I hope I said that right, Elaine, after work, or making herself available to address trail concerns, Kim helps us to see what is possible with collaborative open space management. We cannot overlook Kim's tremendous contributions in getting city restoration efforts back on track this year under COVID conditions. She has approached the enormity of this challenge with discipline, efficiency, and grace. With her kindness, her leadership, and her vast expertise, Kim Frappier will be sorely missed. She leaves us with a vast amount of knowledge that will help guide the management of Pioneer Park and Angstrom Open Space for years to come. With gratitude, the Open Space Conservancy Trust Board. Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you to Jerry and to Marie and to Elaine for all of your contributions and helping this, have the collective voice of this group here.
You didn't want to make this in any way easy, did you? Oh, thank you so much. That was really touching. I am really overwhelmed. My leaving is very bittersweet because I know that you all know how much I value the work that we do together and this community. And so I'm really grateful. And I'm really grateful to all of you. And I need to specifically call out how grateful I am to Elaine, who is just an amazing mentor and partner. And I am really sad to leave her. And why am I leaving again? Like what? But yeah, so I'm just very grateful to the work that you do and to your passion and your dedication. And it's really been an honor to get to work with all of you and get to work on the island. And we will all continue our good work. I am not leaving our mission. I'm just going to do it in different places. And I really hope that our paths cross again, personally and professionally. And thank you again for that letter. That was really, really moving. And I feel so blessed and honored to be part of this group.
So Kim, don't lose track of us, please. The Watershed Company looks amazing. We'd love to hear about that. And if that's a connection, please make it a connection. We did get together and have a small token that we would like you to have.
Oh.
I don't know if people, yeah.
Well, I can only see your background. You might have to divulge where you're sitting, Marie.
I'm sitting in front of my backyard, but it's not, my backyard from months ago. Oh shoot, is there a way for me to fix this? You know what, can I share my screen?
Sure.
Okay, so, but that won't work. That's not on my,
we should be able to allow, oh yeah, because it's not on your screen.
It's not.
I think what you'd have to do is to take down your fake background.
Right, and how do I do that without?
Marie, where the video camera is, icon is at the bottom left-hand side of your screen.
Yep.
If you click on the little up arrow next to it.
Choose virtual background, perfect.
There you go.
All right. You taught me something I've been wondering about forever. Okay.
There you go.
But I can see my kitchen.
Oh my gosh, Jerry, where are you now?
No, now it's probably backwards.
No, we can.
Oh, no, it's not. It's okay.
It's
Oh,
okay.
beautiful.
Okay. So This is a 12 by 12, so it's a foot square, a nice measurement for people like us. And it's a book called The Life and Love of Trees, which I found a couple of years ago and loved. And it reads to me, I mean, I love reading gardeners' journals. And, you know, obviously Thoreau and Aldo Leopold and people like that. So it's got 2 chapters, basically. One's called Life, How Trees Make Their World, and the other is called Love, How We Feel About Trees. And a couple of the sort of things in the covers to the book are, these are quotes. He who plants a tree plants a hope. He who plants trees loves others besides himself. The true meaning of life is to plant trees under whose shade you do not expect to sit. And this one I love. Except during the 9 months before he draws his first breath, no man manages his affairs as well as a tree does. So I picked out 4 pictures I'm going to try to share. And now the book is just full of amazing pictures. But he really goes to, you know, he loves tree trunks and all the little details, not just the big giant picture. Here's his 4 seasons.
Wow.
And I love that tree. I mean, it's amazingly symmetrical. Let's see. And then I love this one because it's just so weird.
Oh, yeah.
And Hillary, this is for you. It just happened to be one I picked out.
Oh, that's a good one.
So we hope you remember us by this book. We are in our COVID way trying to get it to you, but I think Elaine will manage.
I will deliver it to your doorstep, Kim.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. Well, best of luck with all of your work. I will definitely be keeping my tabs on you and hopefully hearing about all the good things you'll be doing. And I'll still be at Pioneer Park. It's one of my doggies' favorites, and and mine too. So I'll hopefully run into you on the trail.
Oh, maybe I'll get your personal email address and we can have a doggy walk.
That sounds great. I will go ahead and send it to you.
Okay. And I have a confession of sorts. The book was oversubscribed. So do I have everybody's permission to like go and buy a QFC card and donate it to the food bank?
Sure.
That's my plan. I'll put it in honor of Kim.
Oh,
Yeah, that sounds great.
that was a good fundraising effort, Marie.
Yeah, maybe I'll do it again.
Well,
And Kim, I think everybody here would like to have a chance to say how much it's been wonderful to work with you. I've loved working with you, getting over to work on the projects with the volunteer projects, and it was nice once to have you set out some pots for me and say, go for it. So thank you.
you're welcome.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
do quadrant reports quickly.
Yeah, can I follow up on it just really quickly, Marie, in the logistics way? I, being realistic, I would say this has the potential, just with all of our staffing shifts, that this will probably mean that we'll need to reorder some of the work items that we have coming up, some of the staff reports. So
Yeah.
I will stay in touch with the trust about which items we have coming up next and which we have the bandwidth to do. I will also let you know that we are planning to recruit for a replacement, if we can call it that, for Kim in the next few weeks. So we'll be looking forward to that. But I do expect that it'll be a little bit of time before anyone is really up to speed to be able to report out on these items the way that Kim has. So yeah, and then if we can do some quick quadrant reports, that would be great.
Okay, Southeast. Last time I was there with Hillary, and everything looked pretty lovely. And the weather hasn't really changed terribly, so I hope it's okay. I have been in Northwest, and it looks good. Now, Hillary, do you have anything to say about our quadrant?
I think it looked how as good as it can be, you know, with like you were mentioning, Elaine, with all of the native trees that are poking up through the ivy. So, you know, it seems like it's as under control as it can be until there's more intensive ivy removal. And it was great to be stuck in a crazy hailstorm with you, Marie.
Yes. And you know what? I came home and was told that there was no hail in the lakes.
Yeah.
It was that spotty. Northeast?
Well, it continues to improve from the period of damage from all the storming. I haven't been there for a little bit, but the last time I was there, there were parts of it that were still pretty muddy, you know, and you had to slog through. But it looks significantly better than the last time.
I was admiring the snow fence that was put in to keep dogs and people from taking shortcuts down toward the footbridge, and that seems to be doing its job very nicely. So yeah, that slope will stay in place.
Northwest?
Well, I think the perimeter trails hold up really well. Looked like somebody on the Salmonberry tried to make a raft to float down the trail. There was so much mud, but it just can't be helped. But having said that, Andy does a great job on keeping everything in order there and clearing out the storm debris. I will say also, we go to Starbucks quite a lot and walk in the park, and there's a woman who has a motorized tricycle, if you will. It's a wheelchair, who uses the perimeter trail to get from her house where she's staying on 68th to Starbucks and the shopping center and stuff. And I asked her the other day if she ever goes out in the street, and she doesn't. She goes through the park, and I'm just amazed. It's got about 10-inch tires, and she says she's never had any problems, and she just loves the park. And I thought, wow, there really is an ADA trail. So once again, Andy just does a fantastic job on maintaining that park. So good job.
And my contribution is the same. I found lots of mud around, which goes with the season, and we're looking forward to Trillium season. So kind of in that between time.
Can't wait. Next meeting? Elaine is what, May? Whatever. It'll be posted.
I'm sorry, I'm frantically trying to pull up my calendar. I believe it is May 20th.
Okay.
So we will plan to see you all then.
Super.
May I have a motion to adjourn?
So move.
A second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Hi.
Hi.
Bye, Kim.
Bye, Kim.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye,
Good night,
Kim.
everybody.
Happy trails.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.